The goodbye no one saw coming. Nobody in the office saw her leave. No farewell party, no final wave, not even a goodbye email. She simply vanished from the 12th floor of Google's headquarters, leaving behind only her badge, her laptop, and one single envelope. An envelope with his name on it, Sundar. It was early, too early for most employees to be in. Sundar Pichai had always been early, not because he had to be, but because for him, work was more than a job. It was purpose. It was legacy. Maybe, somewhere deep down, it was an escape from feelings he didn't quite understand. Feelings like regret, like longing, like guilt. The envelope sat on the corner of his glass desk like it didn't belong. He stared at it. His name was written in small, soft letters. Delicate handwriting, too familiar. In his chest that he wasn't ready to feel? Not yet. 12 years. She had been there 12 years. More than just an assistant, she had become part of his life. Not loudly, not with fanfare. She was quiet, organized, reliable. He never had to ask twice. Flights were booked before he thought of traveling. Meetings were moved before he noticed a conflict. Birthday cards signed before he remembered whose birthday it was. She had been the background to his spotlight. Always there, always invisible. Until... Now he picked up the envelope, ran his thumb across the seal. It wasn't taped shut, just tucked in, like she wanted him to read it, but not right away, like it could wait. But he knew it couldn't, not really. He opened it, and as he read the first line, the world around him, his corner office, the skyline outside. The hum of the air conditioning, everything fell quiet. Dear Sundar, I know this will come as a surprise, but by the time you read this, I'll be gone. Gone. He sat back in his chair. She never used his first name, not once, in 12 years. Not in meetings, not in emails, not even in casual hallway hellos. It was always Sir, or Mr. Pichai. But here, in this letter, she called him Sundar, and somehow, that was what broke him. The news of her departure spread quietly, like a whisper carried by wind. Nobody knew why she left. Nobody knew where she went. And nobody asked Sundar directly. They saw his expression change that day, not dramatically. He didn't scream or slam doors. No, he just became a little quieter, a little slower. And for the first time in years, he canceled a meeting. Behind closed doors, he sat with the letter, rereading it. I want you to know, working with you has been the greatest honor of my life. But I stayed too long. Not because of the job, not even because of you. I stayed because I was afraid to leave. And now I can't be afraid anymore. The words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. He remembered the early days. When she first started, quiet, sharp, humble, fresh out of college. Back when Google still felt like a growing experiment and not a tech empire. She was new, nervous, but fiercely capable. He had just become a senior vice president back then. Not yet CEO, but already a rising star. They were both trying to prove something. And over the years they did. But something in the letter made him realize. Maybe she was proving something else entirely. The next day, he visited her desk. To find her, of course, she was gone. But to feel the space she left behind. Her desk was empty now. No photos. No mugs. Just a clean surface. Like she had never been there at all. Except for one thing. A small paper crane. He picked it up, and under it, a note. Just one sentence. Do you remember Kyoto? His heart dropped. He did. It was 7 years ago. A business trip to Japan. She had planned it flawlessly as always. Flights, hotels, dinner reservations, meetings with government officials and local developers. The schedule had been airtight, but something went wrong. A storm had grounded their connecting flight, and they ended up stuck in Kyoto overnight. It was raining hard. They had no umbrellas. They ducked into a small hidden tea house to wait it out. And for once, they didn't talk about work. They talked about childhood. She told him about her mother, about growing up poor in a small town in Oregon. How she learned origami, not because it was fun, but because it was something her mother could. Teach her with scraps of newspaper when they couldn't afford toys, he remembered that night. She had folded a crane from the receipt on the table and told him it was for good luck. He still had it. Somewhere, the one now in his hand was different, cleaner, more precise, maybe more final. That night, Sundar couldn't sleep. He wasn't sure. Why this shook him so deeply? She was his assistant, not his friend, not his family. And yet, she had become the person who knew him best. Better than most of the board. Better than his colleagues, maybe even better than his own reflection. What hurt most was the fact that he never really knew her. Not beyond the professional details, her lunch orders, her coffee preferences, her flight numbers, but not her dreams, not her fears, not her reason for finally walking away. But the letter wasn't done. There were more pages, and each one began to unravel something he had buried for too long. I've seen you carry more than you show. I've seen the loneliness behind your smile. I've seen the way you stand in rooms full of applause and still look like you're somewhere else. He didn't cry, but he felt the kind of ache that lives in the bones. Heavy, permanent. 3 days later, his executive assistant role was still unfilled. His team had recommended 5 top-tier candidates. Polished resumes, impressive references, even higher degrees than she had. He declined them all. Not because they weren't good, but because something had shifted, not just in the role. In him, he started asking different questions, not about scheduling, skills, or technical ability. He started asking about people, about what they loved, what scared them, what kept them going when everything got hard. He realized he didn't know the answers for her. Not really, and maybe that was the real loss. On the 4th page of the letter, her tone changed. I'm not writing to hurt you, and I'm not asking for anything. Just wanted you to know I left because I needed to find myself again. I gave so much of my time to making your world easier that I forgot how to carry my own. He thought about that line for hours. How many people around him were carrying silent weight just to keep his world turning? How many people had quietly sacrificed without being noticed? He had built empires, shaped futures, spoken on global stages. But now, all he could think about was the woman who never asked for recognition and left without a sound. Weeks passed. His schedule remained full. The world kept moving. Interviews, conferences, emails, deadlines. But every night, he returned to the letter like it was unfinished, like it was a story still being told then. One morning, his phone buzzed with a new email. The subject line was blank, the sender, anonymous. He hesitated before clicking. Inside was a single photo, a small village, a woman sitting on a bench. Facing away from the camera, her hair pulled back, paper crane in her hand. It was her, and that's when he knew. She hadn't disappeared. She had chosen to be seen, maybe for the first time. Cliffhanger ending. Sundar stared at the photo, and for the first time in years, he canceled everything. All meetings, all calls, all commitments. He picked up the phone, dialed a number he had memorized but never used. It rang once, then again, and just as he was about to hang up, a voice quiet, familiar. Hello? He didn't know what to say, because for the first time in his life, Sundar Pichai was speechless. The voice on the lineth silence after her hello was louder than the voice itself. Sundar held the phone to his ear like it was something fragile, something alive. He hadn't thought about what he would say if she answered, wasn't even sure why he called. All he knew was that hearing her voice again made everything else feel distant. The office, the emails, the presentations, all of it faded in the presence of one simple, quiet word. He tried to speak, but nothing came. Out. There were no rehearsed lines, no polished speeches, only breath, long aching breath, the kind that holds too much. And then, slowly, she said his name. Sir, not Mr. Pichai. Just Sundar. Like she used to say it in her head when no one was. Listening, like she was finally allowed to. He sat down, Not because he was tired, but because his knees suddenly forgot how to be strong. "I got your letter," he whispered. It wasn't much, but it was all he had. She didn't respond right. Away. He could hear the wind in the background, birds calling, the faint laughter of children. Wherever she was, it was far from Silicon Valley. "I didn't expect you to call," she said gently. And then there was a pause. Not cold, not awkward. Just honest. "I almost didn't send it. Why did you?" he asked. She sighed. And in that sound was something heavy. Not regret, not anger, but something deeper. "Because I needed to let go of everything I never said." He wanted to ask what that meant, but part of him already knew. He had been too busy, too focused, too far ahead to notice what was happening right beside him. He had missed the silent sacrifices, the quiet exhaustion, the way she always smiled even when her eyes told a different story. "I was never just tired of the work," she said. "I was tired of being invisible." Those words hit him harder than any investor crisis or market drop ever had. Invisible. The word echoed through him like an old song he had forgotten the lyrics to. She had been there every day. Always present. Always reliable. But somehow, he had never really seen her. He leaned forward, his voice softer than he remembered it could be. "You were never invisible to me." But even as he said it, he wasn't sure it was true. They didn't speak long, maybe 10 minutes, maybe less, but it changed something in him. After the call, Sundar didn't go back to his usual rhythm. Instead, he took a walk through the campus. Not the polished executive hallway, the side paths, the ones interns used, the ones employees took when they needed a quiet moment. He started seeing people differently. Their faces, their weariness, their little victories hidden behind tight smiles. He passed by a young employee crying quietly near the edge of a building. Normally, he would have kept walking, not out of coldness, but because it wasn't his place. This time, he stopped. He didn't ask anything, just sat beside him on the bench. The silence was enough. Sometimes being present was louder than any advice. 3 days later, a package arrived at Sundar's home. No sender name. Inside was a small box. And in it, folded in clean white paper, was a second letter. "I didn't say everything that day on the phone. Maybe I was scared. Maybe I still am. But there are things you need to know, not about me, but about yourself." He opened the letter, slowly reading every word like it was a memory unfolding. "Do you remember when your mother visited the office?" He did. It was his first year as CEO. He had brought his mother in for a tour. She had been overwhelmed by the size of the place. The technology, the cameras, but what she noticed most was her son's assistant. Later in private, she had asked, "Who is that woman who keeps looking at you like you're about to fall?" At the time, he laughed, brushed it off, but now the question haunted him. She had looked at him like that, with quiet concern. With soft care. How many times had she caught him when no one else noticed he was slipping? The letter continued, "There's something I never told you. 5 years ago, I almost left. I had the resignation typed out, saved on my desktop for weeks. I had even packed a box, but I stayed, not because you asked me to, but because you smiled at me one day after a meeting, and for the first time in years, I felt like I mattered." Set the letter down, closed his eyes. 5 years ago. He remembered that meeting, a huge product failure. The tension in the room had been unbearable, and she, as always, had managed the chaos behind the scenes. After the storm passed, he had said thank you, had smiled without agenda. He didn't know that smile had kept her there. How fragile we all are, he thought. How close we come to quitting, to walking away, and how sometimes it only takes one. A small moment of kindness to keep someone standing. But the letter wasn't just filled with memories. It was leading somewhere. There was something else coming. Something he could feel building in the space between the lines. "I didn't just leave for me. I left because you needed to lose me." That line stopped him cold. You needed to feel what it's like when the quiet person finally walks away, not out of anger, but out of love for herself. He stood up, paced the room. He had built his reputation on seeing the big picture, on strategy, on staying 10 steps ahead. But this wasn't a code to crack. This was a lesson. And it had taken him 12 years to realize he never once asked her what she wanted. The next day, he called his assistant's mother. He had only met her once years ago during a company holiday event. She was a kind woman with a soft voice and sharp eyes. When she picked up the phone, she didn't sound surprised. "I was wondering how long it would take you," she said. He blinked. "You knew?" "She told me everything," her mother said. "I told her to leave years ago." "But she said you needed her, and now?" Sundar asked. "Now she needs herself," the woman replied. And then after a pause, but she didn't close the door. She left it slightly open, for a reason. That night, Sundar searched through his old emails. Not the corporate ones. The personal folder. Tucked inside was an unsent draft from 5 years ago. Subject line, "Thank you." He had started it after that stressful product meeting. He had wanted to tell her how much he appreciated her work, how he couldn't have handled that day without her, but he never sent it. He read it now with new eyes. It was short, too late, but maybe, not completely. Cliffhanger ending. 1 week later, Sundar walked into a bookstore in a small town on the coast. No security, no media. It's just him and the quiet creak of the wooden floor beneath his shoes. He was holding a copy of a newly published memoir, no flashy title. Just a simple cover with a paper crane on it. He turned the first page, and there it was. "This is the story of the years I gave away, and the strength it took to take them back." The author, her name plain, real, unedited. And that's when Sundar realized the letter wasn't the end, it was only the beginning. Before Google, there was Silence Bear Google. She was just a girl, standing in the doorway of a small rented apartment in Oregon, holding a plastic bag full of everything she owned, watching her mother sleep on a couch that was older than both. Of them combined, there had never been room for dreams, only tasks. Pay the bills, keep the heat on, stretch a box of pasta into 3 meals. Nobody asked her what she wanted to become. They only asked if she could help carry the weight. She learned early that survival doesn't wait for inspiration. So she worked, quietly, intensely. She taught herself how to organize chaos, how to turn mess into method, how to read a room without saying a word. By the time she finished college, her professors said she was the most efficient person they'd ever met. But no one asked her if she was happy. Then came the Google job, entry-level, administrative, but with promise. They told her she'd be assisting a director. She had no idea that director would become CEO within 5 years, but that she would become the backbone of that rise. All while staying in the shadows. What they didn't see was how she was building. A version of herself she couldn't keep up with. Perfect scheduler, the quiet fixer, the calm during every storm. But even the best masks get heavy. She remembered one day, early in her Google years, when her hands wouldn't stop shaking, she had spilled coffee on her own blouse before a board meeting and quietly cried in the bathroom stall. No one noticed she was gone for 15 minutes. When she returned, she smiled like nothing had happened. Sundar had walked past her that day, nodded politely and said, "You good?" She had nodded back, said yes. But it was the loneliest yes she had ever spoken. There were more days like that, invisible moments. Birthdays spent booking flights, holidays spent writing reports. She had once canceled a flight home to see her mother because Sundar needed her. In Zurich, on short notice, she never told him. She told herself it was okay. That loyalty meant sacrifice. But sacrifice, unspoken, becomes sorrow. Years passed, promotions came. But her title stayed the same. She was his assistant, yes. But more than that. She was the filter between him and overwhelm. The translator between chaos and calm. When reporters asked Sundar how he handled pressure, he gave technical answers. But the truth was simpler. She handled it for him, and he never knew. Not because he was cruel, but because she was flawless. And flawless people don't bleed where others can see. After Kyoto, things shifted. She never told anyone about what happened in that tea house. Not because it was scandalous, because it was sacred. They had talked, really talked. And in that, space over warm tea and falling rain. He had said something that stayed in her bones. "You're the only one who sees everything and doesn't ask for anything." He meant it as a compliment. But to her, it felt like a confession. It made her realize something painful. If she disappeared, who would notice? The truth was, she had dreams too, not big ones. Not ones that needed applause or stage lights. Small dreams. Quiet ones. A tiny bookshop near the coast. Shelves that smelled like old pages and sea salt. A dog that waited behind the counter. Maybe a little notebook where she could finally write the stories she had carried for too long. The ones she never had time to tell. She had put those dreams in a box once. Labeled it later. But later is a lie people tell themselves when they're too tired to choose now. And one night, after working 16 hours without a break, she went home. Looked in the mirror and didn't recognize herself. That was the night she wrote the letter, not in anger. Not in haste. She lit a candle, made tea, folded the edges neatly, told the truth. But there was one truth she hadn't written, one she had locked. That deep. When she was 23, she had fallen in. Love, not with a person, but with a moment. It was at a bookstore downtown. A stranger had dropped a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird, and she had picked it up. Their hands had touched. They talked. They fell into easy conversation. She didn't even know his last name. But for the first time in her life, someone looked at her like she was the main character. They met again and again. Coffee turned to dinners. Conversations turned to silence that didn't feel empty. He told her she was born to write. She laughed and said she was born to organize other people's lives. He shook his head and said, "You've got a story. One day you'll write it, and I'll find it." He died 6 months later, by a drunk driver on a rainy night. She never talked about him, not even once. But after that, she stopped writing, stopped dreaming, until she quit Google and moved to that small coastal town and picked up the pen again. Now her book was out there, on shelves. Her name on the cover. Her story no longer filed away behind spreadsheets and silence. And Sundar was holding that book like it contained answers he never thought to ask. Inside was a chapter called The Man Who Never Looked Up. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't bitter. It was honest. She wrote about working with a man who changed the world, but never asked how her day was. A man who trusted her with everything except his attention. A man who called her essential, but never once asked, "What matters to you?" But in the final lines, she wrote something that made Sundar sit down and cover his face with his hands. He wasn't a bad man. He was a brilliant man who forgot that brilliance without kindness becomes loneliness. I didn't leave because he failed me. I left because I stopped seeing myself in the reflection of his success. Sundar closed the book. The sun was setting. Outside the bookstore, a woman passed by with a dog and a paper bag of groceries. It was a normal evening, but inside him, something had shifted forever. He stood up, walked outside. The sky was turning orange. He looked out toward the water, whispered her name, not like a question, not like an apology, but like a beginning cliffhanger ending. Behind him, soft voice spoke. "You finally found the bookstore." He turned around, and there she was, standing by the doorway. Older, freer, no badge, no lanyard, no clipboard, just her. He opened his mouth to speak, but she shook her head, smiling gently. "Don't say anything yet," she said, "just listen." What silence leaves behind these stood there, on the edge of the evening, with nothing between them but years of unspoken truth. The bookstore door creaked behind her as it swung shut. The dog by her side sat quietly, as if even it knew this was no ordinary moment. Sundar looked at her like a man seeing color after years of grayscale. She looked at him like someone who had long made peace with being unseen. The air between them was thick with questions neither of them had the words for. So he didn't speak, not right away, just looked. Memorized the soft lines on her face that weren't there 12 years ago. The new calm in her eyes. The way she stood like nothing in the world was expected of her anymore. and that made her more powerful than he remembered. She broke the silence first. Not with small talk, not with a scripted welcome. She simply said, "Do you know what the hardest part was?" He shook his head. "Realizing how long I waited for someone to ask me what I loved, and how no one ever did." The words landed without blame. They were soft, but sharp, and he felt each one like a stone in his chest. He nodded slowly, eyes never leaving hers. "I'm sorry I didn't ask." She smiled, but not in forgiveness. Not yet. You didn't know how. They walked without planning to, through the narrow streets of the town. Past the bakery, the post office, the quiet little cafe that smelled like warm cinnamon and old hope. She led him to a bench near the cliffs, where the sea hummed softly. In the background he sat beside her, but not close. There was still a distance between them, carved out by 12 years of quiet loyalty and 12 weeks of loud realization. "Do you ever feel," she said, "like you were so busy building something big that you forgot to build yourself?" Didn't answer right away. He watched the waves. He thought about the moments he'd traded for milestones, the birthday dinners missed, the friendships that faded, the way his kids stopped asking if he'd be home before dark. "Yes," he finally said. "Every day." She turned her head slightly toward him. "Then why keep building?" His answer surprised even himself. "Because if I stop, I don't know who I am." And just like that, she understood something she never had before. He hadn't ignored her all those years. He had forgotten himself. 2. They sat for a long while, not as boss and assistant, not as man and woman tangled in a complicated history, but as two tired hearts in need of something simple. Honesty, clarity, peace. "Why did you really leave?" he asked, his voice nearly lost in the wind. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the question settle. When she opened them, they shimmered with memory. "Because I was afraid of becoming someone who only lived through other people's greatness." He nodded slowly. And then, "But you were part of that greatness." "Maybe," she said. "But you can't stay in someone else's shadow forever, even if the light is kind." Not hit harder than he expected. It wasn't an insult. It was truth, and truth has a way of cutting without drawing blood. The sun dipped lower. The sky turned to a soft bruise of lavender and gold. He glanced at her, this woman who had once been just an assistant, and realized something strange. He didn't want to convince her to come back. He didn't want her to return to her old role, to the background, to the spreadsheets and silent heroism. He wanted her to keep walking this new path, and yet he wanted to walk it with her. He cleared his throat. "I read your book, I figured," she said with a half smile. "The man who never looked up," he said. "That was me." "Yes," she replied gently. "But maybe not anymore." He turned to her, finally brave enough to ask the thing he feared most. "Do you think there's a version of us that still exists?" She tilted her head, as if measuring the weight of the question. "Depends," she said. "What version are you imagining?" "Not assistant and CEO," he said. "Just two people, rebuilding something real." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked out at the sea again. The waves crashing below sounded like pages turning in a book neither of them had finished. "That version," she said slowly, "would need to be built from scratch. No power imbalance, no quiet resentments, no pretending." "I'm willing," he said. She finally turned to him. "Are you really? Willing to be seen? To slow down? To ask questions you don't have answers for?" His heart thudded. He didn't. No. Not for sure, but for the first time in years, he wanted to try. She stood up, brushed the sand from her skirt. "I have to go," she said softly. "Will I see you again?" he asked, rising to his feet. She looked at him with that old, familiar warmth, but now there was something else in it. "Freedom, choice, you might," she said. "But next time, don't come looking for the person I used to be." He stepped forward, not to stop her, but to honor her decision. "Who should I look for then?" She smiled. That quiet, tired smile that had once hidden so much. Someone who finally belongs to herself. The missing room the day after he left the coastal town, Sundar didn't return to Google right away. He drove for hours with no music, no calls, no agenda. The silence inside the car felt more alive than any conversation he'd had in years. Every now and then, her voice echoed in his head, soft, measured, unblinking, someone who finally belongs to herself. It wasn't meant to hurt him. It wasn't meant to inspire him either. It was just truth, and that made it more dangerous. Then when he finally walked back into the office, everything looked exactly the same. Same polished floors, same cheerful colors, same fake plants that no one watered but never died, and yet something felt wrong. Not broken, just ... hollow, like someone had scrubbed the soul out of the place when no one was looking. He didn't go to his office. Not at first. He walked to the basement level, the one nobody used. The old archive floor, buried beneath layers of innovation and speed. It was quiet there, abandoned almost. He found a locked door with peeling paint and no
label.
He stood in front of it for a long time, unsure why he was drawn to it at all. Something in his chest said, "Open it." He asked facilities for the key. They said the room had been sealed years ago. Budget cuts, unused storage, he insisted. When the door creaked open, the dust made him cough. But what he saw inside made him freeze. An old whiteboard, covered in faded ink. Names, notes, ideas. The early blueprint of a team. He had built long ago, long before the titles and glass offices. Photos were pinned to the board. He was in some of them, young, smiling, sleeves rolled up.
Nice.
Were people he had forgotten. And in the corner of one photo, nearly out of frame, stood her. No name tag, no attention. It's just her holding a folder. Watching him with quiet focus, he took the photo down and studied. Then he saw something stranger, tucked into the drawer beneath. The board was a folder labeled Retention Notes. Inside were pages of anonymous staff feedback from over a decade ago, complaints, concerns, burnout confessions, and one entry that stopped his breath. "I love my job, but sometimes I wonder if loyalty is only valuable when it stays silent. How many hours of my life will be forgotten so someone else can move forward?" No name, no signature, but he knew it was her. That night he didn't sleep. He went home, sat in his living room, surrounded by success awards framed, press clippings, expensive devices glowing quietly in every room, and for the first time, none of it felt like it belonged to him. He opened his laptop and started writing. Not a press release, not a quarterly report. A letter. The next morning. Every employee at Google received the same email. No subject line, just text. For 12 years. I worked beside someone who gave everything and asked for nothing. I didn't see her. Not really. And if I can miss someone that close, what else have I failed to notice? If you've ever felt invisible here, if your work, your life, your dreams have been swallowed by the machine, this is me saying I see you now. I want to do better. The message ended without a signature, but everyone knew who it was from. What followed was something Sundar didn't expect. Some called it bold, others called it weak, but most simply said, ... Finally, he began holding 101 meetings not with executives, but with assistants, interns, night shift engineers. He asked questions he never used to ask. What do you love outside this job? What do you fear here? What keeps you up at night? And slowly the floodgates opened, stories poured in stories. Of missed birthdays, silent breakdowns in bathrooms, creative ideas that died in unread emails. People who stayed because they believed in the mission, didn't know if the mission remembered their names. One story gutted him. An engineer had spent 6 months working late every night on a product fix that saved the company millions. Number: public credit. No bonus. No thank you. His wife left him during that time. He never told anyone. He had stayed quiet, thinking maybe, just maybe, someone at the top would notice. They hadn't, until now. Sundar kept digging. Not just through stories, it's through systems. He found an internal file marked confidential, buried under layers of permissions. It was a report from 5 years ago, Internal Well-Being Survey, flagged red. Several female employees had quietly raised concerns about burnout, inequity, invisible labor. Some mentioned emotional load, the extra. Unspoken responsibilities women carried without acknowledgement. One name appeared several times, not hers, but someone she had mentored. A quiet voice from the shadows that had tried to speak once. Then left 2 years later, he looked at the report and realized something horrifying. He hadn't just missed her voice. He had missed all of them, and worse. He had benefited from their silence. He went back to the bookstore a week later. She wasn't. There the woman at the counter said she had left for a writing retreat up north. She said not to be found unless you brought her something real, the woman added. He nodded, handed her a sealed envelope. Not a request, not a pitch. A promised cliffhanger ending. 3 days later, small letter arrived at Sundar's office. No return address, just one line written inside. You're really ready to listen. Meet me where it all began. The room with no table kodos smelled the same. Maybe it was the rain on old stone. Maybe the quiet murmur of temple bells in the distance. Or maybe it was the memory still stitched into the air, the night they shared tea in silence.
Ow.
Two people pretending not to see everything they were both hiding. Sundar stood outside the same small tea house, umbrella folded, suit slightly wrinkled from the long flight. He didn't care how he looked. He hadn't come to impress. He had come to be real. Maybe for the first time. He stepped inside. Nothing had changed. The same faded cushions. The same warm wood. The same old woman behind the counter who looked up at him without recognition, then with quiet understanding. She's already here, the woman said softly. Back room. He nodded. His heart was too loud in his chest when he slid the door open. She was sitting there, facing the garden, knees tucked beneath her, a ceramic cup in her hand. No laptop, no phone, no clock. She didn't turn, but she said, You're late. He smiled, just a little. You always said my punctuality was overrated. Only when it's empty. He took off his shoes, stepped inside, sat across from her. There was no table between them, just space. And truth. She set her cup down, met his eyes. You said you wanted to listen. I do, he said. Then listen. For the next hour, she told him everything. The moments she stayed late because he forgot she had a life. It's outside work. The ideas she had buried because they didn't fit his vision. The mornings she arrived early, not for him, but for herself, because being early was the only time she felt in control. The time. She watched him get praise for a project she had quietly saved from collapse. The years she kept choosing to stay. Not out of love, not out of ambition, but out of habit, and how dangerous that habit became. She didn't cry. She didn't accuse. She simply unspooled the thread of her silence. He sat with all of it. No interruptions, no defenses, no explanations, just listening. When she finally finished, the garden outside had turned gold with the late afternoon sun. The light touched her face in a way that made him realize she had always been more than he allowed her to be. I was afraid, he said quietly. If I had seen you fully, really seen you, I would have had to change everything. Yes, she said, and you weren't ready. He looked down at his hands. But I am now. She leaned back, studied him. Not like a woman trying to decide if she could trust a man again, more like a writer trying to decide if a character had finally earned his redemption. Then show me, she said. Not here, not today. In the choices you make when I'm not. In the room, he nodded, and then added, and not just for you. She smiled. Good. Because this was never just about me. They left the tea house together, not side by side, not holding hands, not walking into some cliché reconciliation. They simply walked in the same direction, at their own pace. People passed them. The world moved on. But something between them had quietly healed. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Before they reached the edge of the garden path, she stopped. There's one more thing, she said. What is it? Said you wanted to build something real. I did. Then build a room where no one has to raise their voice to be heard, where there's no table too high for someone. To reach no walls so polished they reflect only power. He nodded slowly. A room like that would take time. Good, she said. Then take your time. But don't wait for someone else to give you permission. She handed him something, a folded piece of paper, another crane. He looked at it. In his hand, but this one was different. She had written something inside. The wings. He unfolded it gently. Just 2 words. Build better. He didn't ask to stay in touch. He didn't ask where she was going next, and she didn't offer. Some stories don't need constant contact. Some people don't return to the roles they once played. Sometimes they simply leave behind the words that change everything. Months later, in a small room on the lowest floor of the Google campus, something began to happen. Not a launch, not a rebrand, not a keynote, a conversation, 6 chairs, no. Stage, no titles, just a circle. And one rule: everyone speaks. That room had no schedule, no cameras, just space. And Sundar was there not to lead, not to fix, to listen. And one day someone new asked him, where did this idea come from? He smiled. Not like a CEO, not like a leader being praised, just a man remembering a woman who taught him that silence is never empty. From someone, he said, who left behind the best kind of legacy. The end.